the United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
The people who knock these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
Welcome back to On Future War, as we begin Phase 2 of the series, moving from our previous focus on power projection and operational mobility into tactical technology, discussing the systems and programs that will be needed to dominate the modern battlefield, particularly in the maritime and littoral regions. Today's episode explores fifth-generation aircraft, colloquially known simply as 5th Gen, through the lens of post-World War II aircraft development through the Cold War and stealth aircraft, highlighting the requirements and characteristics that 5th Gen will need to dominate in future battle space. But there's more to the story than just 5th Gen, as the vast majority of all Western Air Forces will continue to be numerically dominated by evolved 4th Gen designs. Host Mike Pako Benitez and guest Andrew Scar Van Timmeren, both experienced USAF tactical aviators, take us through this discussion, highlighting how 4th and 5th Gen aircraft can operate together to become a more potent force than either alone, and share some views about what the next or 6th Gen of combat aircraft may encompass. This is Authentic.
Welcome to On Future War, a series of discussions on the critical issues around pure level conflict, now and in the near future and beyond, mostly focused on the Indo-Pacific region. I'm your host, Mike Pako Benitez. The last few episodes, we were talking all about access and mobility. How do we get to the fight? We've gotten to the fight. We've got access. Now what? And so today we launched the next phase of our series, which is the tactical tech that follows and how we're going to use it. And those that are steeped in military operations know that the prerequisite for pretty much everything is air superiority. And so with that, we are going to start with air superiority, which means we're going to talk about fighter jets today. And to do that, I've got a friend of mine, which is going to be awesome, here to help me unpack that. So Andrew Van Timmeren, call sign Scar, welcome.
Pako, what's going on, dude? Stoked to be here with you.
Yeah, you're doing your thing over on the Raptor podcast. I'm going to have to borrow your time and come over here and educate us all on all the other generations of fighters and how it all fits together.
Now, as like an unapologetic air superiority guy, this is so important. It's so interesting. I mean, how can you not be interested when you have things going on in the Indo-Pacific region, in the importance of the battle space above it is vast in the air as much as it is in the sea. That's why like the air is so important. As no surprise to anybody listening, the entire planet is covered in air. And so we want to have superiority at our time of choosing over that air. And so extremely excited to talk to you about it.
All right, Scar, let's get started with a framework. We'll start with fighters. You're an F-22 guy. I was a Strike Eagle guy. Those are different generations of fighters, even though I'm older than you, but your aircraft is newer and better. So with the Raptor versus the F-15E. But let's start at the beginning with generations of fighters, and then we'll just kind of dig in from there, if that's okay.
Yeah, let's do it. And so just to bifurcate this conversation, the generations of fighters as like kind of a useful moniker for bidding of aircraft capability didn't really come about until like the jet age of fighters. And so we want to think about cloth covered biplanes of World War I. Those are amazing and created pockets of air superiority. And we had our first air combat, and many an ace was born out of World War I. They are not considered generations of jet fighters. If you think about moving into the interwar period and then World War II, we also have some amazing fighters, the Spitfire for the Royal Air Force. You've got the P-51, P-38, amazing airplanes that enabled air superiority in their various areas of responsibility. But when it comes to this conversation here, we're talking about the jet fighter generations. And so that is initially kicked off with examples like actually still in the World War II time, the Me-262, which is a German-made, actually quite an amazing airplane. Is those who pay attention in history, the Germans did some amazing work on rockets, jet propulsion, materials that we ended up stealing, after World War II for our space program and other things.
Operation Paperclip. Yeah.
Happy to do it. But what they did is they produced, not just prototyped, produced and used in conflict a jet fighter before anybody else. And so a dual engine aircraft, multi-cannon, and it actually could outrun all of our fighters, principally used in point defense. And one thing that is interesting about it is its capabilities it was only brought in later in the war when the Allies were gaining an advantage and many of their better pilots had been lost. And so you gave an amazing tool, which is something we can lean into if you so desire. We have to get into the most important meshing, which is the man and the machine. Because you can have an amazing machine, but somebody who's untrained and it will not reach its capacity or capability. Or you have an amazing person, but a crummy machine, they're also limited. And so you have to get both of those together. But the Me-262, built by the Germans in World War II, a prime example of the first generation of jet fighter.
And most importantly, and we'll touch on this a little bit later, I think, you have to have enough of them to make a difference.
Oh, no doubt.
I know, sore subject for the Raptor guy. I know.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, you mean the guy who had his buy cut from 700 plus to less than 200? Yeah, let's talk about that. So no, you have to have not the man, the machine, but yeah, you're right. Quantity is something to make a difference, especially when, again, just your tee up is exactly right. When you think about the vast distances, anybody who's flown over the Pacific Ocean goes, holy cow, it's a big place out here. And so you have to have numbers and availability. And so that is critically important. It's a great point.
So Me-262, fun fact, it's got swept wings, but that was a fix. It wasn't designed that way. So the engines are massive because they were the first generation jet engines, and they put it on the airframe and the prototype, and it moved the CG too far forward. And so they had to bend the wings backwards to move the CG so it was more neutral so they could fly it. And turns out a swept wing design has some pretty good benefits for a jet-powered fighter, which we saw in the Korean War. And so there's the follow-on of that generation bled into the Korean War, right? With the F-86 being probably the most famous example.
No doubt. I was actually just going to bring up the F-86 if we move on. So let's actually just think about defining what those generations are. So first generation fighter, just effectively jets. The only thing that's different between the dual engine Me-262 and the dual engine P-38 is the fact that it had jets, right? They both had guns, used missiles. And so you have the advent of the speed and capability that is brought by jet engines. And so now let's think about second generation. Second generation, I love it. The F-86 Sabre, America, here we go. We are now immediately following the Second World War within single-digit years. So it actually broke speed records by the end of 1949. Actually, I think it was 1948. Actually set a speed record. And so again, just like in mere months after the war ending, we already have a production fighter out there making a real difference. So what makes a second-generation fighter? Now you have not only you're using jets. In the example of the F-86, it's a single engine, totally fine. I wish I had two. Two's awesome. I'm biased. And so it's single engine. And it also has the ability to carry things externally like missiles, rudimentary, non-guided, point in the direction you want to fire kind of missiles.
That's right. IR guided missiles started in the mid-1950s. The AIM-9, 1957, I believe.
Isn't that bonkers?
It is bonkers.
It's like some of the technology. I often say Back to the Future is real because if you want to find some of the latest and greatest technology to bring forward, you might actually want to go to like research papers from ARPA, or NACA, now NASA, 40, 50, 60 years ago. That was back when the DoD, not to diatribe here, back when the DoD actually led Planet Earth on R&D. And so we're doing some real good work in that space. So you're exactly right.
The second generation, very fast. So we're talking supersonic, some limited basic sensing, and then the first generation of missiles, right?
That's right. I forgot to mention maybe as we're leveraged in the war, some radar for warning, etc. But now you were able to bring that size down and bring some range finding and other capabilities through the use of its sensors airborne. So it wasn't coined Moore's Law at that time, I don't believe, but technology is starting to get miniaturized and put into positions where it could be used in the air domain.
Yeah, you're a fan of the F-86 and you mentioned it. The nose just above the engine inlet, that little nose, that little bump, it's usually painted black on the F-86. That is like one of the first radar gun sights in the world. It was put on the F-86.
Yeah, it's just a rangefinder, right?
Yeah, it's a range finding radar. It's so you could actually do lead computing gun sights for gunshots. That's what made the F-86 so much better than the MiG.
Yeah. When as those who are listening, I'm sure already understand, to have an effective gunshot, you have to have lead, plane, and range. So you have to have the lead fire, because if you point at it, your bullets fall aft of it. That lead is gauged by the range. So the greater distance you are away, you have to lead it further, just like if you're shooting something that like a deer that's on the move, and then plane of motion. You want to be in the same plane of motion. So if the adversary aircraft is going downhill or uphill, you also, to have the most effective gunshot, should want to go downhill or uphill. And so having one of those made more scientific, more specific, more trusted versus World War II, where it's like, I feel like this is right. Now you're actually having digital ranges displayed to you. What a difference that makes.
Oh, yeah.
What a difference that makes in the effective use of your munition, to have a trusted source of information in one of the major things that you need for an effective gunshot.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's fast forward. The war's over in Korea. We're in the interesting, the late 50s, when we build a new aircraft and we take our lessons and say, you know what, we're going to build an aircraft that now can do multiple different missions. It can do air to air, it can do air to ground. And so now the thing that I think of for the third generation that is just embodies this whole spirit of it is the F4.
No joke. Tell me what embodies the spirit of the third generation fighter for you out about the F4.
Okay. For me, it has more advanced sensors. So it has a lot of sensors. We don't have computer chips yet. So there's a lot of vacuum tubes and some other technology I can't remember right now. A lot of CRT displays. We have an airborne radar in the backseat of the F4. Originally an Navy program, fun fact. And then the Air Force was forced to adopt it. And then it went through 3 different versions. I think they built like 5,700 or something like that.
Yeah, multiple variants, widely exported. That's something too. Like, you actually, up until the early 2000s, I believe the Germans were flying them. We exported them to, this is a blast from the past, the Iranians. And so there is the F4 widely proliferated around planet Earth. 100%.
We're recording this in April of 2024, just for posterity. A month ago, one of the last F4s in service in the Pacific, and I can't remember what nation, fired an AIM-7 in a test exercise. I'm like, what? What is this 2024? That's ridiculous.
The Great White Hope, as it's affectionately called, I believe. Those missiles made a big difference, right? So that's one of the, additionally on third generation advanced sensors, many of these aircraft went supersonic. That's not to say second generation aircraft couldn't go supersonic, but this is now, you got the Century series of aircraft where many of them planned from the very beginning on going supersonic during their tactics, while executing their tactics. And so supersonic is a big deal. The other thing too is, in the F4 is a great example of this, air refueling. And so you had range extension provided through some off-board gas station in flight. So tankers were proliferated principally in the United States Air Force as the tanker backbone for the Department of Defense, leveraging what is still used now. I'll just throw it out there as an example, the KC-135. And so you have amazing feats of bravery, amazing feats of planning, logistics, etc., facilitated by the range extension and time on station extension provided by tankers. Third generation brings that forward. And so now you actually can't effectively build, anything now without the ability to get gas. And so another critical point.
So we have the F4 and in the Century series, some of them go really, really fast as interceptors. Some of them are multi-role. They all have better sensors so they can see further, whether to intercept or to shoot missiles. And then those sensors can help guide the missiles. So we have radar guided missiles now. These are the first generation of aircraft that have that. But the cockpits are still steam gauges and switches all over the place. It looks like an Apollo mission. It's really an ugly cockpit.
Yeah, we didn't quite bring human factors into like...
Human factors, not so much.
Although I think we did around the third generation time, you correct me if I'm wrong, if you actually look at like the stick and throttle, we'll use the F4 as a great example. We really did have some early stages of HOTAS, which stands for hands-on throttle and stick, where you can switch between gun or missile or bomb without having to take your hands off the throttle or stick, which is a huge deal in comparison to Russian-made 15s, 17s, 21s. where they had to, if they wanted to do anything with their radar, their weapons, etc., under G, under stress, etc., had to take their hands off the stick and throttle to find a switch that they maybe can't quite see and do something with it. So that's a big deal.
I remember jumping around just a second, and then we'll get into fourth generation US. I remember training against MiG-29 and C-27, like Russian threats. I remember the first time I like climbed into a cockpit of a MiG-29. I'm like, oh my God, this is terrible. Like, how can anyone even use this stuff? Like the radar is like it's the size like the palm of my hand, like the little display. Like I can't even see anything on that. You're fighting specifications, not the actual application, though.
No, this is like, again, this gets into the man, the machine, right? Like you can have like these MiG-17s and MiG-21s were like early on in the Vietnam War, these early MiGs were doing some good work, right? And so they were not aircraft that were not capable. They were very capable aircraft with reasonable operators. But once you leapfrog that generation, you take some of these things into account, and they're stuck in the past with trying to find switches in the dark that are behind them to flip from, radar to IR to gun to bomb. Like, man, those like little seconds, as you know, Pako, make a big difference. Or if you have to take your eyes off the adversary to go hunt around for a switch that's off your left-hand side.
Yeah, so to sum that up, the third generation, we added more technology, which expanded the roles of the aircraft, but that it was kind of not exactly thought, well, the technology was what it was. So it wasn't exactly like integrated in a well thought out, like human machine interface, like the synergy of man and machine, like wasn't really thought out too much. And then yada, 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 we have what would then become the fourth generation fighters. And these are the teens that we think of. The F-14, 15, 16, and 18 being the ones that, top of mind from the U.S.
U.S. perspective, yep.
F-14, we're not Navy guys, but I give it props. It's a sexy aircraft and was really the first fourth generation fighter. Although, F-15's got a special place in my heart.
There you go. The world's greatest distributor of MiG parts, right, is the F-15 family of aircraft. And the big deal here are you now have really amazing engines purpose-built that crank out a whole bunch of thrust. They crank out also a whole bunch of electrical power. Now, what do you do with this electrical power? You power amazing radars that can see further than you've ever seen before. You also have passive warning in the form of radar warning receivers. So now you're not only just sending out radar energy, which there were radar warning receivers, I'll call it RWRs or RARs, that were available in third generation aircraft, but now as we miniaturize and make more capable of this technology, they're wider band, way more sensitive. And so you have the ability to have, I'll call it 4 pi steradian, which is 360 and azimuth and altitude capability for sensing. And you also have that various displays around the cockpit. I'm not going to get into integrated avionics just yet, but you have these displays that are color, that are updated much more frequently, that are really displaying much more of a battle space picture.
The first generation of military glass cockpits. That's how I would say it.
100%.
The first generation. So
yep, you're done with the CRTs. You're done with stuff like, Magnavox as the brand on it. You've got like real DoD focused stuff, without a doubt. And it's also enabled by you got greater ranges of your AIM-120. So you got the AIM-120. Certainly, let's also timestamp this. 2024, fourth generation aircraft are the backbone of worldwide air superiority, still by quantity. And so if you're thinking, man, they're doing a blast in the past on fourth generation aircraft, no, even though we'll get into fifth gen and the wide proliferation of within our allies and partners, the F-35, fourth gen are without a doubt the mass and capability in the worldwide marketplace still.
As a Strike Eagle guy by trade, thank you for your support.
That's right. This is the part of the podcast, Pako, where I build your ego up just to break it the heck down.
In like 20 minutes, you're going to tear it apart. But that's good.
I'm so excited to tell you how good you are.
I'll take
yes,
the build
that's right. Take the wins when you get them. I understand. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Let's talk about the fourth gen just a little bit more for a second. So the F-14 and F-15, for people who haven't been to an air show doesn't even do it justice. You have to walk up and touch the aircraft. And I always tell people hey, it's not what you think it is. What do you mean? You'll know it when you see it. And so I used to bring people out to the flight line. And as I get closer, you get within probably 20 feet, 10 feet of it. You go, wow, that is huge. That is way bigger than I thought. Like, yeah, it's big. Like the F-14 and F-15 are massive. And they're massive because of that avionics that you talked about. So they were airplanes built around long-range radars, like huge, huge radars. And these radars were putting out tons and tons of power as a result of their two big engines. And those radars were out to go detect things and then to go support guiding long-range missiles. And those radars could do look up, look down, so all aspect, so things like that. Those engines were really powerful, so greater than 1-to-1 thrust ratios. And then you had things like swept wings for the F-14, but that's the big ones. That's where the bleeding edge avionics is in the radars. And then you get into the F-16 and F-18, and the one thing you'll notice is like they're pretty small, like the Legacy Hornet, not the Super Hornet. Like the F-16 is tiny, and that bleeding edge technology was in the avionics as far as the flight controls. So fly-by-wire, where the F-15 is still cable and pulleys, the F-16 was fly-by-wire. So lots of advances in avionics and aviation and aeronautics applied in different ways across the fourth generation.
That's exactly right. And a perfect example for those who think about, you may be a civilian pilot or just common sense, you pull aft on the stick. There's a direct connection between the stick or the yoke and the elevator in the back, versus on a fly-by-wire, when you pull aft on the stick, there are a bunch of ones and zeros that go to the flight computer. And then the flight computer moves that thing. And it may not move it the amount that you thought it would. And so the fly-by-wire enables actually a bunch of safety mechanisms where it can actually prevent you from over-G'ing or going high on AOA, or angle of attack, or alpha, as we call it. But it also enables, it can enable max performance up to those limits without going over, for both the survivability of the man and also the survivability of the machine. And so fly-by-wire is really the standard going forward from this point.
A fun side story, my last unit in test, we had the F-15Cs, the F-15Es, and the F-15EXs. And off the top of my head, it's probably one of the few modern fighters that's gone from legacy cable and pulley upgraded to fly-by-wire, and people had to convert. So you're flying the same airplane essentially, but a completely different flight control. So we go and fly basic fighter maneuvers or air combat maneuvering. And if you tried to fly the F-15EX, which is digital, the same way you would fly the F-15C or E, it would end up completely different, because like, oh no, that technique doesn't work. I got to change my techniques.
Yeah, your left right AB in the E model doesn't. You got to find a different cheat code to do the various maneuver when it's a fly-by-wire. It's also interesting. You'll find people discuss in public, and this may be a more of a colloquial term, but it's important for people to understand. It's kind of thrown around, this notion called a 4.5 gen, aircraft. These are aircraft which lack the cornerstones we'll get into in 5th gen, but really they're still relatively. Would you call the EX a 4.5 gen aircraft? And what I mean by that is fly-by-wire. Now you're getting into integrated avionics.
Yeah, it basically has really, really good avionics, detection, electronic warfare, radar, really, really good stuff. It does not have the sensor fusion for a variety of reasons. Mostly didn't have the budget, but there is correlation in some fusion, but it's not single pane of glass sensor fusion type things that some of the 5th gen you have.
No doubt. That's why I continue to say that 4th gen are the backbone around the world, because there are many countries who have, Eurofighter Typhoon or Saab Gripen or Su-35 or J-15, J-10. We kind of go around the globe where these would never be called 5th generation aircraft, but they're not your 1980s 4th generation aircraft. And it is principally because of the avionics and software that's baked in the cake. And also I'd just say the fly-by-wire. And so there's this kind of tweener that continues to actually get produced. It's 2024 and these things are rolling fresh off the production line, not 5th gen, but not dad's 4th gen. These are modern 4.5 gen aircraft, which, I'll also say should not be scoffed. They bring real capability.
Yeah. When you see some of the 4.5 gen stuff out there doing good work against the best adversary replication that you can think of, and you're like, oh wow, that's surprisingly good, very, very good. Turns out when you're a 4th generation guy, you don't have to worry about signature management and things. You can just turn your radar up to 11 like Spinal Tap, and just blasted. Like, I'm not hiding from anyone.
I was gonna say, there are actually like some real advantages when you don't care. When you don't care about like whether you need to be seen or not, and you just go from the moment I walk out to my jet and start my engine, this is just being silly. But the moment I start my engine on the ground, I am being seen. And you go, if I don't care about that, then I don't care about the RF coming off of my jet. I don't care about trying to hide behind a tree, so to say. I am going to just get the maximum performance out of every radar return that I can. And that's why, to your point, on the like some of these like 4.5 generation aircraft, I'll actually pick on the Su-35 as an example. It's got a honking schnoz, dude. It's got a big old nose. You know why? Because it wants to put out effective radiated power from that radar to see around planet Earth, so say. Because it doesn't care about being seen, it wants to see as far as it can. And classic radar theory, size matters. And so you want to get the maximum power out. And so 4 to 4.5, still meaningful. So I continue to compliment you, Pako.
Oh, thank you. The last thing, then you can break me down. So the last thing I think that's good about the 4.5 gen is like it does not have an outer mold line consideration. So like the F-15 at the X is a good example. Massive aircraft, lots of power with thrusties and avionics, and it's got weapon stations everywhere. So you can just hang something on the aircraft and go fly it. And it's pretty forgiving. So, you have your 12 missile loadouts for air to air, and you still have 3 empty weapon stations. You can put a 5,000 pound bomb on a wing. It won't affect it. It's just fine. Again, because you don't have to worry about being seen because you are seen. So very, very forgiving. You don't have to build an aircraft around a missile.
Yeah. The other thing too is like you get and you can speak way better than I can about this, but we continue to see the benefits of crew coordination up and through 4th generation aircraft that you saw in 3rd and previous generations. And so there's meaningful capability to be had there. But
I think we've hit the peak of building me up. So now I think now's the point.
That's right.
I think now's the point. We're going to transition to 5th generation, and then it's all going to fall apart.
You know me too well, right? Try to slide these things in and ninja, get after it. So let's talk about the greatest thing that God has ever equipped engineers to build: 5th generation aircraft. So 5th generation aircraft, principally, led by the Raptor, which is born from the ATF competition. I'll refer you to our Raptor series on Authentic here, where we dive into much of that. But as we learned in Vietnam, you have to be able to hide to get closer. And why do you have to hide to get closer? Because these surface-to-air missile capabilities of our adversaries were reaching further and further. So you have these amazing radars, these telephone pole missiles that can reach a very long ways, which can prevent your highly reflective other aircraft from getting close enough for they to make an impact. So actually, the whole reason why we have 5th generation is because air superiority was challenged. So how do you mitigate the challenges provided by these ground-based systems and actually the increased capabilities of these airborne systems as well? I'll give them credit in the form of like Su-27 and other things that have had at the time really awesome capabilities that are coming out in the 4th gen, so we have to mitigate that.
Yeah, like the F-22, I mean, it was the requirements are written in the peak of the Cold War, right? And it was about quantity over quality, negating that from Russia. So being able to deny the ability of a Russian fighter to even see the F-22 and then putting all of those missiles inside the F-22 gave them just technologically a kill advantage from engine start, right?
100%. So the real common thing you'll find, there are 2 main pillars that come out when it comes to 5th generation aircraft. 1, stealth from the very beginning, from the design. And then number 2, integrated avionics. And so let's talk about stealth. Stealth is a combination of shape and materials that you build the aircraft out of. You can find a whole bunch of open source information about that. But now from the very beginning, you are designing this aircraft to break a portion of the kill chain so that you can get in closer, mitigate those weapons engagement zones, whether it be from a surface air missile system or an airborne weapons engagement zone. And so you are mitigating that radar capability through the shape and materials that you build the aircraft out of. So stealth from the very beginning, there is no 5th generation aircraft that is not stealth.
And to your point, you talk about the shape and the size of the aircraft. Notably, the F-22 is about the size of an F-15. It's actually a little bit bigger. It's freaking huge. And the second thing is the loadout. It's got the 6x2 loadout, notably parroted after the F-15 requirements. And Scar, not to elicit scar tissue. See what I did there? so the connection between the F-15 and the F-22, I know a sore spot. So one was designed to replace the other, yet both persist in the world today.
That's right. We're not going to get into like political, budgetary, or other reasons when it comes to like the category of aircraft. You got to be stealth, dude. You want to be 5th gen, you got to be stealth from the design, stealth from the beginning. Before the first anything is built on the floor, it is a stealth aircraft.
It's the ingredient before you bake the cake. Some Russian 4th generation fighters bake the cake and then they put some icing on the top to try to change their characteristics, which, it does a little bit, but I mean, it's not part of the ingredients that you baked in. So to your point, you got to build it with this from the ground up.
It is way easier to make something that's stealthy less stealthy than to make something that's less stealthy more stealthy, to follow my knuckle dragger logic there. And so the other thing I'll say about 5th generation aircraft that is critical, again, you don't find a 5th generation aircraft that doesn't have this, would be the integrated avionics through sensor fusion. And so when you think about a 4th gen or even some 4+, but it's getting better generation aircraft, if you think about sitting in a cockpit, you go to the Smithsonian or go to some air museum somewhere and you can sit in an F-14 or F-18 or F-15, you'll see 3 or 4 different displays all tied to very specific capabilities. So you have a display for the radar, a display for the RWR, a display for data link, et cetera, and now it's incumbent on the operator to see these various things and kind of make sure the character on this display is the same character as on this display and put it together in his or her mind. And it just demonstrates the amazing capability of the operator to do that. But now in 5th generation aircraft, all of that bespoke information from various sensors, active, passive, again, radar, RWR, are brought in, fused into a common picture on your display, and an odd thing is presented to you. So a track is a track is a track from all these various things, and it actually lowers the workload on you from having to decipher from many different things, which actually increases the capability of you to have more work put on you in the things you have to think about. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on having seen both non-sensor fused and sensor fused aircraft from your previous life. What are your thoughts on that, Pako?
I used to teach in our training unit, the people who get their wings and they come and learn how to, fly the Strike Eagle. And as a backseater, so I used to do the ground training with the other weapon systems officers, but then every time I fly with a new pilot who doesn't know anything. So every day they're trying to kill me. It was fun. So part of that is like, you have to know the HOTAS from each cockpit because you're not in the other cockpit and they're completely different. And you have to know like where their screens, and there's a whole human factors because in all these, even though they're not fused, they are like cockpit displays, like glass displays, but they're all separate and you can put them wherever you want, mostly around in the cockpit. So some people fly with the radar on the left screen, some put it on the right screen, and then you can scroll with HOTAS. So you have multiple pages you can program in. So like on the backseat of the Strike Eagle, as an example, there's 4 displays, and each display you can program 5 pages deep, but there's like 30 pages of info that you can program into that scrolling. And so depending on what screen you're looking at when and what button you push or what second of an interceptor a mission, it takes a long time to get a very, very good cross-check, to find the information, to bring it up when you need it, know where to go to get it. And that is a huge learning curve to get really, really good. And I remember when the baby Raptor guys or the baby F-35 guys, they are a lieutenant in an F-35, the way that it's so much more intuitive, they're just inherently don't have that learning curve. And if you're not in the jet, you just see like, man, these guys are doing really good. And then the debrief, they're like, yeah, I mean, it's just there. And I just, pushing the button. Meanwhile, the 1,000-hour, like 4th gen guy is like working his ass off, trying to, make sense of all the data and fuse it between his 2 ears, right? Where in a 5th gen, it's happening behind the glass. So yeah, huge, huge difference.
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to only ever fly the Raptor. Well,
Raptor guy, see?
That's right. But we did actually have to fly the F-16 for 8 flights, which is a whole nother story. And it really affected us. Like, can you pull 9 without blacking out, but have somebody there to catch you and save you in case you do. We don't do that anymore. We actually found it wasn't very value added, but I had very rudimentary, access to those displays and don't remember much. But then you go into the Raptor and you're exactly right. Like the sensors are always picking stuff up. That means the jet is always presenting you with a picture of your surroundings. And so the real issue, same as you, I also taught at our Raptor schoolhouse. And great assignment. Holy cow, what a rewarding time to watch people come off the street from pilot training and then walk out as a slightly above, well below average fighter pilot. But you quickly go, yeah, actually the real challenge is to figure out what is important and what isn't, because the jet tells you so much because it's displaying everything it gets on the one display. And so one of the things we harp on is situational awareness and task management, because you can get overwhelmed with the tasks. If you keep hunting and pecking at every little thing that the jet gives you because the sensors and what's displayed to you is so amazing, you can get overwhelmed. And so task management is really, really, like, prioritization is so important, dude.
I remember early on, we got to go and way back, I'm dating myself a little bit, way back when the operational test units were first being stood up for the Raptor to develop like tactics and write their pubs. That we'd go out and we set up these missions, be the adversaries and this and that. We come back and to debrief, they're showing us their displays. I'm like, playing it back, it's like, oh, it's all right there. And like the running joke at the time was like, Raptor has SA, but does the pilot have SA? Yeah,
that's right. That's so valid, dude. You can lead the horse to the water, but the dude's got to drink. And so you'll find like, I'll just speak for myself, like a Raptor guy, we'll call it sled. Like if somebody sleds, what that means, that person just effectively just flies to their death. And the SA situation was probably all there for them, but they just got so distracted, and that will happen. That's why the real cross check, as you said, like maybe looking at 4 different displays for various information is what 410 you gotta do for your effective cross check. For a 5th generation guy, the effective cross check is focusing on what's important right now and disregarding what's unimportant right now.
Yeah, you get to that frantic stage when your SA bubble around you just pops, and you're like, I have all of this information and I can't process. You just freeze. You're like,
yes, and then you sled. You're a perfectly hydrated, fed fighter pilot, airborne, and you gotta keep track.
It's like having a brain freeze.
Yeah,
cognitive brain freeze just locks up for that 5 or 10 seconds. That's a long time when you're going that fast.
But that's why we train, right? And I actually don't want listeners to think like, oh my gosh, American red-blooded fighter pilots are like flying straight, unaccelerated level flight with autopilot on to their death. No, that's not what's happening. But what I do want to say is like our training is effective enough to tax you, even with amazing machines that you strap yourself into, you can be taxed. And that actually is the whole point. The whole point, if I just keep getting into the man in the machine, you have to tax the person that's in it to make sure that they are effectively using the asset that they're given. And so that's actually upped the game on our training, is we've had to like up the capabilities of our simulators, our live flight, in order to match what these 5th generation aircraft can provide.
Yeah. Bigger, better, faster, more. You got to keep pushing your SA bubble out by you get to that limit, being uncomfortable. Like, that's the end of it. And then you learn like, oh, I know where that limit is. And then you get used to that limit, and then you want to expand the limit with more and more and more. So,
right.
And the acceleration of getting from where you start to more and more is faster because you're starting with a very good starting point with a 5th generation fighter.
No doubt about it. And it really is proven, like, again, how amazing the operators are that we have. And that when we go, oh my gosh, we have this amazing aircraft that can tell you everything about that adversary track from the very beginning. You don't have to work very hard. But now I'm going to actually ask you to be a mission commander earlier. I'm going to actually ask you to be a package commander. I'm going to actually ask you to orchestrate much more than just your own aircraft earlier, because it gives you the capability to do that. So it's really important to think about.
Yeah, we've been talking about the F-22. Let's talk about the younger, much smaller.
Is there another 5th generation fighter? I'm not aware.
There might be.
I didn't know that.
I mean, not to make another dig at the Raptor fleet dive cuts, but there is more F-35s in the U.S. flying around now than F-22s. So
it was very quickly eclipsed. It was like worldwide worldwide F-35 inventory very quickly beat out Raptor worldwide inventory years ago. And so Again, the F-35 adheres to the cornerstones of fifth generation. Integrated avionics, check. Stealth, checkity check. And so it is.
It's actually checkity check on the avion. Everything is checkity check.
Yes.
Right. Because they're designed, 15 to 20 years after, or 15 years, something like that.
Oh, yeah. Right.
The number 1,000, as we're recording this, F-35 number 1,000 should be coming off the line, or it's already off the line. It's probably sitting in the parking lot based on some delivery delays.
It might be in the parking garage.
It's in the parking garage. I saw it on the line. I was there in Fort Worth doing a tour of the line, I don't know, 6 months ago, something like that. And it was there. Like, that's number 1,000 right there. Like, cool.
And I'll give them credit. That line is amazing, right?
Oh, yeah.
Isn't it something? It's over a mile long.
Yeah, it's a mile long.
And at the end rolls an airplane. It's amazing. It is something.
And it's not just a mile long. The plant is a mile long, but it weaves back and forth. So if you actually want, it goes up one end, down the other, and then back. So the actual assembly line is 3 miles long.
You actually have airplanes like nose to nose going opposite directions down the road effectively within this factory, because you're exactly right. And so the what is amazing about the F-35 is they did learn many of the lessons from the Raptor when it came to low observable maintenance and avionics advances. But the other thing I want to say about the F-35 specifically is that it was designed way more effectively as a multi-role fighter than the Raptor.
So it was. I'll just put a point on that to differentiate the two. This is me building you up now, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So the F-35 was designed for simplicity and scale, and that's simplicity and commonality across replacing multiple different types of aircraft, mostly modeled after the F-16 requirements and legacy F-18 requirements. And it had some other stuff in there. Harrier A-10 was actually part of the replacement requirement way back when. So it was somewhat of a compromise, which different versions of the F-35, this A, B, and C, but it was really replaced to be that of the high-low mix. It's the low, if you will, even though it's the F-35 and it's pretty advanced. It's supposed to be the widely proliferated foundation of an Air Force. Whereas the F-22 is like, imagine if cost was not a factor. How good could you make an air superiority fighter? Like, oh, we could put thrust vector nozzles on it. We could do super cruise. We can, fly up to the bozosphere with these big old flight control surfaces and put the most powerful engines in a fighter, and we'll put 2 of them. I mean, yeah. So that was me building you up, Scar. Raptor, amazing aircraft, probably the pinnacle of an air superiority fighter. Maybe we'll see what happens next. We'll talk about 6th gen, maybe a few minutes.
Yeah, what I would say here is there is still quite a bit of design space for mission accomplishment, even within 5th generation aircraft. So the 5th generation aircraft, like you said, the Raptor, still unmatched in the air-to-air game, but it is without a doubt not the air-to-ground 5th generation fighter of choice. Versus the F-35, without a doubt, the air-to-ground 5th generation fighter of choice, not designed to be the preeminent pinnacle killer within the air-to-air domain. And that is okay. That is okay, because even within 4th gen, you have a wide space to maneuver for design and mission utilization. In the 5th generation space, as long as you've got integrated avionics and stealth, you actually have quite a bit of freedom to maneuver to modify designs or point design, in the case of the Raptor, against a specific use case. And so you don't have to always have the Raptor and F-35 look like each other. You might. A good example of a 5th generation aircraft that has some blood in it of Western designs, but is still dramatically different, would be the J-20. The J-20, or this, I'll even say this, the Su-57, they are 5th generation aircraft as we can best understand them leveraging open source information, but they do look different, and they're for different mission sets, and they have different performance characteristics, but they still have the cornerstones of 5th generation. And so there's still a bunch of room to maneuver even within the category.
Yeah, we've got a few other countries pushing out their own designs now too. You have Japan with FX. Turkey has TFX, which is now flying. And then you have India, right? You have the AMCA, which is a fun fact. They walked away from the Su-57 program after they decided it was just not good enough. So they made their own fighter. Like, what? Says a lot about maybe Russia's engineering. I don't know.
I was just gonna say there may be other reasons that you could walk. You should walk away from Russian fighter designs or sustainment. Maybe the interesting thing about it though is, for a handful of reasons, the F-35 will probably always be the most widely proliferated 5th generation aircraft, at least for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, the partners and allies. I forgot how many. There's like, it's 20 something nations now.
Yep. You have a whole host of our NATO allies, et cetera. And so the thought process there is to achieve efficiencies in maintenance, sustainment, parts, manufacturing, et cetera. And because you have these common aircraft, if you are an American owned F-35 in Italy, you can pull an Italian owned part out of their warehouse because it's the same airplane. And so that enables allies and partners more interoperability, which the Raptor clearly does not have. And so that is a meaningful aspect of it.
Yeah. All right, Scar. This is the point where I need you to build me back up. How can 5th generation and 4th generation work together to do something that maybe neither can accomplish on their own?
I'm so happy you asked, Pako, because when you think about the capabilities of in a successful family, the family has a bunch of different people in it, and they all have their strengths and their weaknesses. But when you put them together, you enable magic to happen. And so 4th generation oftentimes are able to carry way more ordnance. And so they can pack a bigger punch. And so the 5th generation guys can get closer, potentially pass information back from forward, the leading edge, I'll just call it. And then those 4th generation aircraft can bring in a lot more of those weapons because they don't care about signature and really bring the mass. And so the collaboration and effective fighter integration between 4th and 5th generation is actually what wins the day. If you were a military with only 5th generation, you're actually leaving something on the table. I'll just be frank. You're leaving something on the table if you're a 5th generation only force. If you're 4th generation only force, you're also leaving something on the table. And so when you bring them both together in that kind of high-low mix of stealth and heavy hammer, I'll just kind of call it, it really is something. An effective, I like, my favorite mission flying was what we called F5, or I said it, fighter integration. It is the absolute best. When you get a 4-ship, or well, let's go like a 2-ship a Raptor and a 4-ship a Strike Eagle in your background, and we're in flow, dude. We're saying the same things on the radio. We're passing information back and forth. We're calling out each other's targets, except like, and we effectively pass and have track custody between, and we're effectively managing priorities together. There is like no greater buzzsaw on planet Earth than an FI integrated 6-ship.
One of my favorite training sorties I think I ever did was 2 Raptors, 4 Strike Eagles, and it was a 6v16. So it was the 6 of us, it was 4 ships of Red Air of various types of very good advanced U.S. fighters, we'll say, and being able to, defend the BX, protect the flag, and being able to, man, it was amazing, just amazing to see it all come together.
It is, and it's that matching of 4th gen knows they're going to be seen, so maybe the adversary gloms onto them. 5th generation then could get sneak and be unseen. 4th generation, you more likely than not carried more than our 6x2 in that example. And so the ability to match the strengths and offset the weaknesses of a 4th gen, 5th gen mix is magic.
The point of that, because we're connected, for people who don't realize, like in the 4th gen, you can have a big radar and see something. Well, the 5th gen can just see that you see something on their network, and they don't have to transmit anything. They can just sit there and hide in the dark and see all the information that the 4th gen are actually using, and then they can leverage that to shape the picture, we call it, or they can manage the geometry, manage who's going to shoot what when, because they have the luxury of being able to be so selective. It's just so unfair. It's great. Should never be fair.
No, the whole point of FI is actually to create the unfair fight in the mix. And so it's when you get going, it's amazing. It's breathtaking. And the ability for, if we just bring this, to like the Indo-Pacific focus, like you can create pockets of air superiority with 4th and 5th gen in a meaningful way in 2024. And so it's a pretty awesome opportunity.
The one thing that the 5th gen did not completely solve for from the 4th gen is range. Do you think that going, that's my terrible segue into the next gen, so 6th generation fighters, do you think range is going to be one of the attributes that they tried to bring back? Because it was in the 3rd generation fighters with our Century series, our long range interceptors. Do you think that's going to come back?
Yeah, when you think about, and I'll just continue to lean on the pivot to the Pacific, which started over a decade ago. That's what we say. And so when you think about the requirements for what the next generation of aircraft could be, they were informed by the desire for us to ensure we have access to create pockets of air superiority over vast distances that are seen through an Indo-Pacific lens. When you think about the requirements of the F-22, who was the real threat? It was the Bear. And we had access to runways throughout Europe. And so your Raptor didn't have to fly thousands of miles to get to the front because you could park somewhere in a NATO country and get there pretty easily. And so when you think about the fact that we have limited access to runways and islands and et cetera within the Indo-Pacific, and that has been on the forefront of our mind for a very long time, by very long, I'll just define as over a decade, the requirements for 6th gen, I imagine, would include a focus on range.
Yeah, and they have, China, thinking of the Indo-Pacific, they had invested in missiles pretty smartly, not to kill the fighters, but to kill the tankers. And if no tankers, no gas, no fighter, no fight. So the breaking the ability to project power by just having these huge flying telephone poles that can reach out and touch these basically converted airliners that are full of gas. They can't maneuver. So what do they have? They have distance. They stand off very, very, very far. And that means that the last point where you can top off gas, if you're even a 5th generation fighter, is wherever that tanker is.
That's right. And so you could find a whole bunch of publicly available statements from Indo-PACOM leadership, as well as Secretary of Defense and others. We don't have I'll just even say Pacific Air Force PACAF leadership. Like, we just simply do not have the tankers to support the vastness of the area. And so everybody who gets a tanker is for a very specific reason and for a very specific amount of gas, because everybody else also needs it. And so if you can bring yourself into the fight and not need it, that's a meaningful enabler for everybody else. I can imagine you can find a whole bunch of renderings, and I have not bestowed with unique information about 6th generation. But if you look at some of these renderings, notional renderings from the various defense industrial based players, you can imagine that stealth is still critical. So if you think about all the generations and how they built upon each other, they actually don't lose anything from a previous generation. And so I imagine, what did you have from 5th gen? Integrated avionics, and you had stealth. I can almost imagine and guarantee that 6th gen will have that.
To clarify that, I think a little bit more, when I see the renderings and discussions and understanding the threat environment, it's the next evolution of stealth with maneuverability, right?
Yep.
Your F-35s and F-22s are stealthy in their own ways, but inherently to the outer mold line at a certain aspect, at a certain frequency, they're optimizing that design for, because it's a trade-off, right? They still want to be very maneuverable. So I would imagine your 6th generation fighter is like, how can we increase the spectrum of low observability, increase the angles, so all aspect low observability, but still maintain maneuverability? I think that's where you see the next generation aeronautical advancements.
That jives in my mind, Pako, because when you think about, and we already discussed, what forced the issue on 5th gen is the greater reach and coverage of the adversary's ability to deny us the air superiority. So it's principally through radar and ground-based radar capabilities. So that is continuing to get kicked further out. It's also going into greater and different bands of the RF spectrum. And it's also, I'll just say, multimodal, where it could be using other things other than radar. And so you would want to bring forth a capability that has the capacity to create pockets of air superiority still even in that mix. And so that I agree with you. That's my long-winded, I feel like I'm really smart way to say I agree with you.
Well, I appreciate it. Look, you build me back up at the end. Look at that.
That's right. That's why I'm here.
Scar, this is a good trip down the generations of fighters and kind of like where it's going to go in the next generation. So I've appreciated our time. I always enjoy talking with you. And at the end of the day, though, maybe this is a good segue. The next generation fighter is going to come out. The 6th generation thing, whatever it's going to be, is going to be awesome. But it's going to have one thing that the 5th generation, the 4th generation, the 3rd generation, the 2nd generation, and the 1st generation fighter had. Do you know what that one thing that it will still have?
A dude or dudette.
A dude. It will have a dude or a dudette in the cockpit. So that is our segue, because Scar, we'll meet again very, very soon. And we're going to talk about what happens when you take the man out of the cockpit.
That's exactly right.
And we're going to talk about drones, collaborative combat aircraft, and all kinds of fun things in the air domain and where that's going. And we'll do past, present, and future, just like we did today. Make sure we can keep you up to speed and share the knowledge that we have, and maybe some of the knowledge we don't have, but we'll get it from each other.
Yeah, we'll figure it out. But this is where that pivot from like man and machine, maybe if you can just maximize what the capabilities of the machine are and offload some of the requirements of the person. And so this is where unmanned systems, there aren't really clearly defined in the same way fighters are, like first generation unmanned, second generation unmanned, et cetera, et cetera. There are more groupings based on size and capability. But air superiority, without a doubt, will in the near future be provided by unmanned systems. And so when we think about the Indo-Pacific theater and we think about why you have a tool in the first place, it is to provide a capability that's needed for the operational requirement. And so whether it's a manned third generation fighter or an unmanned collaborative fighter, you just got to use the right tool for the right use case. And so as we think about the advances in autonomy and greater software and large in advanced materials and manufacturing, you now can really bring forth some amazing capabilities in the modern day that rival manned with an unmanned system. If the name of the game is air superiority, which is, I built my life on that, I shouldn't care about which hammer hits the nail. I just need a hammer to hit that nail. And so I think that's where we're heading, and it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, there's a lot to talk about when we come back together and rejoin for our next episode. But until then, for all of the listeners out there, stay on Freak. This is On Future War. See ya.
Thanks to Pako and Scar for the discussion. As they mentioned, they will both be back for our next episode on drones, more appropriately referred to as unmanned aerial systems. What we've learned about their lethality from recent combat, how they will change the battlefield, and how to best employ them against peer threats. If you've enjoyed this program, you can find additional commentary, interviews, and in-depth series on current affairs and military aviation at Authentic Media on YouTube or on your podcast provider of choice. On Future War is brought to you through partnership with Cubic Defense. For over 50 years, Cubic has been facilitating warfighter readiness to prevail on Night 1 and beyond.